Hello, everyone, to another episode of Average Ontario Anglers Podcast. Today we are on episode 5, with the theme is going to be Ice Out Pike, which spring is starting, or has started, and I am excited for open water fishing again. How about you, Jesse?
Oh, I've been dreaming about this for so long.
So as you have probably already guessed, my name is Andrew, and co-host today, as usual, is Jesse. So we're going to jump right in today with the interesting fishing fact, which Jesse has prepared for us. And to follow our tradition, I'm going to rate his interesting fishing fact. I believe I was using a number grade and you were using a letter grade.
Yes. So I'm hoping for an A+ with this one because I know what Andrew likes. And Andrew likes history. And he likes old lures. So this interesting fishing fact is going to get an A. So our interesting fishing fact of episode 5 is about the classic lure, the jitterbug.
Nice.
The jitterbug. Okay. Now, if you're not familiar with the jitterbug, it's probably one of the most popular topwater lures for like the last 80 years, pretty much. It's super popular. It's that little crazy looking topwater with the big metal cupped lip. When you cast it out and reel it in, it just
made by Arbogast, one of my favorite vintage fishing lure. It's still in operation today, but
100%
of the vintage lures are one of my favorites to collect.
And we're going to talk about that guy because he's about the interesting fishing fact. So
cool.
I'll ask Andrew because he probably knows this. When did the jitterbug come out? About what time?
I would say 40s or 50s.
1938.
Okay.
So
nice.
pretty long time ago it came out. And you have to admit, this lure, though, it's synonymous. That's the new word that I learned for this.
Word
it's
of the day is synonymous
with bass fishing.
Yes.
If someone bass fishes or their grandpa bass fish and you open their tackle box, they probably have a jitterbug in it. Right?
If anyone who's like 60 or 70 years old sees some bait in the surface of the water making bubbles, it's like, is that a jitterbug?
Yep, it's a jitterbug. And for me personally, my dad doesn't use a lot of lures, but one of his favorite lures was the frog colored jitterbug. You know, the one that's like green with the black dots on the back?
I own one, yes.
Yeah, so do I. And like that to him, like to me, it's a very nostalgic lure because that was his lure. Like he had a few lures that he used, but that was the main one he always loved using. So anyway, it's a crazy, amazing lure made by Fred Arbogast. So also who was from Ohio, USA, just as a side point. But these were originally made out of wood like most modern or most vintage lures were, right?
Yeah.
But eventually they made them out of plastic. And I don't think I've ever held a wooden one myself. All the ones I've had have been plastic. But they still have that classic metal cupped face plate lip that makes them have the crazy gurgling sound. But the interesting thing is, in 1942, because of World War II, there was actually a production run of them with plastic lips. Because of the ammunition, companies weren't allowed to use a lot of metal, so they actually had to make the lip out of plastic. And they had a bunch of different colors, which I think it would be cool if they brought it back just as limited edition, because they had like yellow lips, like not clear yellow, just like full out yellow plastic. They had black, they had red, they had a whole bunch of different colors. And if you look them up online, they look sick. Like I'd buy one 100%. Cool. Who's to say if the action was exactly the same, but I'm sure it was pretty good. Another interesting thing is about the guy Fred Arbogast himself. So like that guy was a legend of his time, kind of like, you know, the Bob Izumi, but back in the olden days. But he was the inventor of many popular lures that are still popular now. Mm-hmm. And that says a lot because like he invented a lot of these lures in the early 1900s and they're still being sold in mass quantities today. The cool thing about this guy, Fred Arbogast, he was actually a very good competitive caster. So I didn't know this, but apparently back in the early 1900s, they had tournament casting competitions. And apparently Fred Arbogast was one of the top champion caliber casters, and he had a few world records to his name.
Wow.
Now I'm just thinking like gear has changed so much, but imagine back in the day, like in the 20s and 30s, the fishing equipment they had was literally nothing like it is now.
I've casted some reels, both a like bait caster style, a casting reel and a spinning reel from, I think the reel I have, spinning reel is from the 50s, and the bait caster I have is from I think the 60s, and they cast like crap.
Oh, they're terrible. And like they're not refined at all like they are now. But imagine being that good back then with that equipment. Imagine how good he'd be with stuff now.
Yeah.
You know? So like this guy was like apparently just like, you know, a sniper with a fishing rod. The guy could cast like, and he was winning competitions,
the
like
old
world
pistol
records.
Grips.
Oh yeah, super short and fiberglass rods and like, And like, just imagine the old line they had back then.
Well, remember when I sorry, a little side tangent to the interesting fact, but we were camping in Algonquin Park, and I decided to use my old Head and Pal push button reel combo that I had given to me, and that thing is fiberglass. It took me 20 minutes before I could cast the thing more than 30 feet with like an Aglia spinner. Like it's weird. I could not cast that.
Super whippy. So anyway, this guy was a very accomplished fisherman, and he was obsessed with fishing. Like, this guy was obsessed with fishing. There's actually a whole biography about this guy. It's like 120 pages long, but just this one guy. And he, back in the day, he studied bass behavior. So that was his main thing. He studied bass behavior so that he could design lures that drove them insane. So you have to think, like, back in the day, like, now there's so many copies of like poppers and jitterbugs and stuff like that. But like, he's the one that made them popular. Like, he thought that in his head. Like, the jitterbug must have looked kind of gimmicky back then. Yeah. But just the way that it plops through the water and has that crazy bubble trail behind it. Think of how much research and like prototypes he made to get to that point where he's like, this particular lure is going to drive fish insane for the next 100 years. And it does.
Yeah.
Like, imagine how much tinkering or how smart this guy was. So definitely, that's the interesting fishing fact, is how much of a beast this guy was. A legendary angler was Fred Arbogast from the early 1900s. And he's designed so many lures, and like, we know a few of them, like offhand, that are the most popular is the jitterbug and the hula popper.
Yep.
And they're still slamming fish to this day. So like, old lures still work, and the old lures designed back in the day, the bass still hate them or love them. They just smash them. So I thought that was interesting because Andrew likes old vintage lures.
Yes.
And like, jitterbug to me, again, it's dear to my heart because it's something that's nostalgic. But if you don't own a jitterbug and you fish for smallmouth, largemouth muskie, 100% get one.
One of my favorite of the Arbogast lures is the Arbogaster, I believe it's called. And it's one of the first square-lipped crankbaits. Like, again, like, that thing has all the properties of a square-lipped crankbait today. Like, you can fish it around timber. Like, that's... I don't know if that was part of his process in designing it, but it wouldn't surprise me at this point now.
Yeah.
Like, I can totally see him.
And I know now Fred Arbogast, like, their company, like, obviously he's long dead, but it's owned by Pradco, which owns like a whole bunch of different lures. I'm pretty sure it's Pradco. But they're sold through that. So there's all kinds of new jitterbugs. Like, there's the jointed jitterbug. There's the musky-sized jitterbug. They have the 2.0, which looks pretty good.
Yeah, the jointed ones have the updated paint schemes. They look good.
And
but again, they have the classic lip because you can't beat that.
The classic lip. And my favorite way to fish a jitterbug, just as a side tangent, I love the black jitterbug at night.
Yes. If
you're out at night and it's just like, the moon's out and it's just like flat water, and you whip out a jitterbug and you don't have to see the lure. You can know how fast to reel it in just by when you hear that perfect plop, 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 and you see the little bubble trail behind it in the moonlight, and then a bass just comes up and smokes it. That, to me, that's topwater fishing. It's so fun.
My first decent walleye was caught on a black jitterbug at night, and I was casting out, reeling in, and then I would stop and I'd dead stick it, and you could hear the fish just nipping at it because it's just silent, like flat water, and just and the hooks are rattling on the bottom as they're hitting this thing. Just not even moving in the water.
That was at Algonquin?
That was at Moira.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we camped at Moira at a buddy's empty lot.
Good times. Anyway, that was the interesting fishing fact. So what's your rating of that?
That was good. That's an A. A+. That was, I don't know how you're going to top that one. That one was good. I like it.
A+.
He geared that to me and not any of the listeners. I apologize to all our listeners.
I have a technique. You got to give people what they want to hear. And Andrew wants to hear old lure stuff, then I give him old lure stuff. Don't worry. Next interesting fishing fact should be better because Andrew's doing it.
That's not true, and I've geared it to you, so we're also cutting out everyone else.
If you're listening to this, I apologize that I made you learn about some old guy who invented lures.
Enjoy what I enjoy, people. It's great. All right, so to our main topic, ice out pike. So I know a lot of people, everyone's looking forward to open water. I know some guys, like the weirdos out there, prefer ice fishing over open water. I'm just kidding. You guys are great. But I love open water. I like ice fishing, but open water is where it's at for me. And one of the first species that I target with open water is pike.
Same here.
And I think like one of the biggest, or the most obvious question would be, for some that are newer in the angling community, would be, why fish for pike? So I know for myself, I've got to list a couple reasons why I like fishing for pike in the spring. First of all, they're a cold water fish, so they're aggressive. They come in shallow. They're getting ready for the spawn, or they might be mid or just after post spawn. Depends what time in the spring you're fishing for them. But They're accessible. They're plentiful. They taste good if you want to eat them.
Very good. Surprisingly good.
Really good. And when you hook into them, especially in the cold water, they fight better in cold water than they will in the heat of summer.
100%. Yeah. Like, I noticed though, like, we'll go ice out pike fishing and you'll hook a pike, not a big one, like 3-4 pounds on it. They fight good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the summer, you'll hook into it and it just comes in like a giant flasher into the boat.
Yeah.
Spinning, like not even moving.
It's like, I just hooked a wet sock with teeth. It's like a nightmare.
So what, are there any other reasons you would point to as to why like spring pike is so good as a good opportunity if you want to get in the water in the spring and you want to go for something sooner than, when bass season opens in a couple months?
Yeah.
Like, what else would you do? Like, I know there's crappie fishing, but that can be tougher. It's tougher and tougher to find them these days. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, to catch them from shore, very limited shore access where you're going to be on crappie waters. Whereas pike, you can go Lake Ontario, anywhere on the shoreline, in bays, rivers, they start coming in, right? You can go on
if they're in season.
Yeah. If of course, you always follow your guidelines. But, I mean, the fact is they're there. Whether or not you can legally catch them.
And I think that's the main draw is because, like,
they're there.
Pike kind of get a bad rep from a lot of people. They're like, oh, I don't want to, get those slimy things in the boat. But like spring is the time when they come shallow and they're accessible to a lot of people. So like if you don't have a boat or a kayak or whatever, now's the time of year where you can catch potentially giant pike, like over 40 inches close to shore, and like Andrew said, there's lots of places you could fish them at, like river mouths at the lake. And there's all the Kawartha lakes have them. And like, if you live in Northern Ontario, I'm not 100% familiar with their regulations, but like, down here anyway, there's lots of opportunity in the spring to catch them, and no one fishes for them. Very few people.
Yeah,
which is great.
Great for me.
Sometimes when the steelhead and creek is like thick and there's tons of guys out there, it's like me and Andrew have had days where we're like, I don't want to stand shoulder to shoulder float fishing, and then we'll throw the boat in or the canoe into like a local place for pike, and we'll have a good day pike fishing, and we won't see anyone on the water. We'll be all by yourself. I love that
for sure. So, where are the pike then in the spring? We danced around a bit. We've mentioned a couple things.
Exact GPS coordinates, please.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell them.
No. No, definitely not.
So, in the spring, they are, like, for this time of year, they're in pre-spawn. I forgot to look up what temperature of water that they go, but the average person isn't looking at temperatures of water for when they actually want to.
I have it written down.
You actually researched this as well?
Well, because my interesting fishing fact was going to be about pike, but then I thought it'd be boring to have an interesting fishing fact about pike and then an episode about pike fishing.
Okay. So what do you have there?
So like Andrew said, pike spawn, it depends where you are. Anytime between March and May. So like early March, sometimes like a lot of the bays and stuff, they're still frozen. Mm-hmm. But they can spawn under the ice actually, which is interesting. But I feel like we'll talk about this, like when have you personally seen spawning pike? Like, I generally don't see them spawning in early March. They probably do 100%. I just don't see it. When I see them spawning, it's usually like April, like April-ish,
even beginning of May.
Yeah.
Beginning of May into then, depending on the year too, right?
You have to think, they close pike season in April. Like, it's closed for 1 month in April, and that's generally when they spawn.
Yeah.
But the temperatures you're going to look at is between 40 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 4 to 7 degrees. So that's when they kind of start spawning. So like that's pretty cold. Like Andrew said, they're cold water fish. Yeah. 4 degrees, like that's literally just after ice out. The water's like ice cold.
100%. So just like, a lot of people are familiar with kind of the salmon life cycle, how when salmon are getting ready for their spawn and they spawn up at the rivers, they do what's called staging. So they come in and they will hang out in front of the river mouths. That's why they have the big salmon derbies and stuff like that. And then once the spawn starts, they start moving into those creeks. So the same thing happens with pike. Pike will actually stage up. They'll start moving into the areas where they're going to have their spawn early. So that's why even if it's pre-spawn for them, as soon as the ice is out and you can actually start casting, or if you're ice fishing, they're pretty shallow water too. But when the ice is out, they are shallow because they're getting ready to be in those spawning grounds. So spawning grounds for pike are... In general, is shallow, warm bays or rivers where the current is low. So if it's in a river, look for like a back bay, something like that. That's most likely where the pike would spawn. If you're fishing early season pike, then you'd want to kind of fish around those areas, moving where the fish are coming in from the deeper water from the main lake to get to that area. So fish downstream of that, fish around the outskirts of those shallow, weedy bays, stuff like that. That's where you can find pike, essentially, in the early spring. And even post spawn, they move just out of those weeds or just on the edge of those weeds, because weeds are where all the forage fish are as well.
Especially if you're looking for bigger fish, because I think that a lot of the small males stay shallow for longer, and the big females are like, as soon as they're done spawning, they may sulk for a few days and then they shoot down to that first deep weed line.
Yeah.
So like if you're fishing and just catching dinks, go a little bit deeper and you might be surprised.
100%. Same thing even in the warmer weather. A lot of people, they're used to catching smaller pike in the summer when they're bass fishing, stuff like that. But you're generally going to catch hammer handles. That's because pike don't actually like the warm temperatures. They're in the deeper, colder water. They're at, spring-fed creek mouth, stuff like that. That's where you're going to find the big pike, because the warm temperatures where you're going to have all these little hammer handles in there, which is slang for a small pike.
Snot rocket.
Snot rocket, yeah. Little crocodile. So they'll stay in the warm temperatures just because it's safe. They could get eaten by a larger pike or by a muskie, whatever's in the waters. But the big pike, who have established themselves in that system, they're going to be in the cold water, which in the spring, thankfully, is accessible because it's right up on shore.
Yeah. And I know there's not a lot, but there's some guys that, we see on Instagram, and they're fishing out in fairly big water in small boats or in kayaks and stuff this time of year, and they catch giant pike. I'm talking like over 40-inch pike, and it's very accessible. Like it's not something crazy. Like you don't need an expensive boat. You don't need like a bass boat and Panoptics and all this stuff to go find these fish. Like they're literally within casting range of shore a lot of times. Yeah. So it's great for any dur level. Like here, go out and chuck a jerkbait, or we'll get into gear, but like you don't need a lot of stuff. It can be very simple.
Yeah. And even during winter time, if you're ice fishing, stuff like that, again, this is going to be all about spring pike, but just knowing the behavior of pike will help no matter what time of year you're going for them. So pike in general, they are an ambush predator. So they don't cruise around like lake trout. They don't really hold to structure too much. Like they can, they hold to some structure, but at the same time, they're roaming around. They're looking for those schools of shad, whatever they can feed on. Pike are an ambush predator. They're not cruising around open water hoping to find like a big bait ball of fish. Pike are going to be sitting in weeds, sitting around like hard structure, and then as soon as something comes into their strike zone, they go into that S formation and then just shoot out. They're actually the fastest freshwater fish in the world, and it's as an instant burst of speed. So when you're going for pike, looking for pike, look for something they're going to be holding to, hiding in to ambush the prey from. So that's where pike tend to be whenever they're feeding. So even, again, during pre-spawn, post-spawn, they're still going to be near those weedy areas. The water temperature is still cool enough to hold them there, and they're going to be ambushing prey. So if you're fishing a weed line, you can be fishing some, like a chatterbait or a jerkbait right on the outside of those weeds or right above the weeds, and pike will come out of nowhere and just smack it.
And they're like eerily camouflaged sometimes. They'll come out of literally nowhere, and you're like, there was nothing there, and a pike will just appear beside the boat and inhale your bait.
I can't tell you how many times at the cottage, like we're a cottage on a river, and the river is quite deep. The river's 60 feet on average, its depth. And it slopes down really quickly on its shoreline. Like I know Jesse's, like we grew up fishing that.
You jump off the dock and you're in 20 feet of water.
Yeah. So, and the dock's only 10 feet out into the river. So the weed line at that river is, you maybe have 4 or 5 feet of weeds between the shore, and then it's too deep for weeds to grow. It drops off so quick. But so when you're standing on the dock, you can see the outside edge of that weed line. And I can't tell you how many times I'll be reeling in a bait, and then a pike sitting right beside the dock just comes out of nowhere. Like I was just swimming there, I was casting there 50 times, and I literally see it shoot out from like 8 inches water in the weeds and smokes it. Like it blows my mind how these things can hide in the thickest of weeds.
And that's the thing, they are top predator ambush hunters. Like that's what they're designed to do. Yeah. And they're literally good at it. Today's sponsor has nothing to do with pike fishing, but today we have paired up with Kitefish quality flies. Now, if you're into steelhead fishing or trout fishing, you probably know Matt from Kitefish, because he sells tons of his pink worms and beads and pegs and all his steelhead fishing accessories. Definitely check him out. We've been buying stuff from Matt for years. Like the first bead I ever bought when I caught a fish on it was from Matt. I bought it at Gagnon Sports. But the prize that he's donated for this is 5 packs of plastics, 1 pack of pegs, and 5 packs of beads. So that's really a good value. It's definitely, if you already have some steelhead stuff, but you want to add to your collection, or if you have literally nothing, he's going to get you set up for trout season. The little pink worms, some little, I don't know what he's going to give, because you're going to have to talk to him about that, but he's going to ship that actually directly to you. So that's a really good prize. We'd like to thank Matt again for sponsoring this. And again, if you're a company that would like to sponsor a giveaway on our podcast, please let us know.
Awesome.
Anyway, continue, Andrew.
Back to our regular programming.
Yes. Thanks.
So after these messages, we'll be right back. Anyways.
There's no like random stops of advertising in this podcast, because, you know, we're not going to do that. But that was as close as it's going to get. So yeah. Thanks, guys. Right.
So anyways, back to fishing for pike.
Ah, yes.
So what are pike eating in the spring? What do you think they're eating, Jesse?
Minnows?
Primarily, yeah.
Yeah.
So frogs aren't out yet. They will eat them 100%. Yeah. But frogs aren't out in the water yet.
They're probably still like burrowed.
They're still burrowed in the mud. Yeah. So pike, they will eat crayfish, but generally they're not rooting around in the bottom looking for crayfish like a bass would. Mm-hmm. So they are waiting for smaller game fish. So it could be smaller bass, could be perch. Just on everyone's, you know, every fish eats a perch pretty much. Mm-hmm. I've caught them on worms before.
Yeah,
they will.
Yeah,
but primarily they're going to be looking for like bait fish,
smaller pike too.
They're smaller
cannibals.
Pike. Yeah. So if it's swimming and it can fit in their mouth, they can actually eat something 1/3 of their length. They can successfully catch, eat, swallow, not choke to death on it. Something 1/3 of their length.
Imagine Andrew eating a 2.2 foot long submarine sandwich. I mean, I can actually imagine that because he eats a lot of food,
but yeah, like that's
pretty impressive.
And it's not just the length. Like you have to consider then that's also something of that girth on that size as well. Like they can fit big bass.
We've caught literally dead walleye that choked on a little bluegill.
Yeah, and
here's a pike literally eating something 1/3 of its size. Yeah. No problem.
You could get a 30-inch pike that is eating a 10-inch walleye.
It's crazy.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, anything that's working. So the lures you'd want to use would be like spinners, spoons, especially in the spring. Using something that's a little bit slower is good. So jerk baits are fantastic.
Probably the best overall lure you could use.
Like we talked about before, like the X-Wrap for pike for me works really well.
If you want to hear about that, make sure you check out our episode 3. Our episode
3 top lures. Yeah.
No, episode 2. Top lures.
Episode 3
was we talked a whole bunch.
We're already
about
getting confused. It's like we've done a bunch of episodes.
Feels like we've been doing this for years. What if you could?
Too bad it doesn't sound like it. We're very green.
If you could only have one pike lure for the spring, what would it be?
Jerkbait, 100%.
Hard or soft?
Hard.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I would want. Ideally, like an X-Wrap is great because again we talked 2 trebles. I don't miss pike on the X-Wrap.
They inhale it.
Yeah. They smoke that thing and. So 2 good strong trebles on an X-Wrap, and you can fish it at any speed. So if they're more aggressive that day, fish it fast. If it's gotten real cold again or it's really early season, fish it real slow. Put long pauses in your retrieve. They're still going to be waiting for something to come by and it's going to pause in front of their face. They're going to go for it still. Yeah,
because they're cold water fish like you said, but they're also cold-blooded. So when the water's like 40 degrees, like they're really slow.
Yeah.
They may attack things, but like they
need that opportunity
they're just
to attack
slowly go up to your bait, and if it's just sitting there, they're going to eat it.
Yeah.
So like long pauses. That's why
because
Andrew
again
does well
too,
in the spring.
You think of every other fish as well. All fish are cold-blooded. The rest of the fish will also be moving slow. So if you're fishing something unnaturally fast in super cold water, you're not going to catch stuff.
Like minnows don't do E. They can't run her.
Yeah. Like so, all the bait fish that the pike are going to be used to and will try to attack are going to be moving sluggishly as well.
Yeah.
So like one of the spoon, what would you say your favorite pike spoon would be? I know I have mine.
I know you have yours. I would have to say a Len Thompson Fire Tiger. I think it's like their platinum series. It's silver on the back.
I know a guy who swears by the Len Thompson 5 of diamonds. Like that's his pike.
I like the Len Thompson. Like there's a lot of good spoons. Yeah. But I think the Len Thompson for me, I don't know what size number it is, but it's the one that's 3/4 ounce. Mm-hmm. It's not huge, but it's just the wobble to me. There's something about it. It just, for me, that I have a lot of confidence in that.
For me, mine is the Williams Wobbler.
Yep.
The hammered silver. just straight hammered silver. That to me is one of the best pike spoons, especially in the spring. Now, again, if you're casting from shore, you're not going to be able to cast that very far.
It's thin.
It's very thin gauge steel. The benefit of it, though, is you don't want to reel it in too fast. You need to get that perfect speed where it just is wobbling back and forth through the water. And that little sachet as it comes through, you can slow roll that on top of weeds, like of the emerging weeds and stuff like that, on a drop off. And to me, that speed is like perfect of just some like big sluggish alewife, just like
actually,
like
it's
half dead,
imitates
around.
that perfectly.
Yeah,
that size profile.
Yeah, so for me, that's my favorite, and they have good strong hooks in them right out of the box. I love it. Most spoons do in general, but the 3/4 ounce spoons I find are a bit more difficult to fish slow because you're not going to get that action. They work great. Yeah. So when the water temperature can deem you to do something a bit faster on the retrieve, then I'll go from the Williams, because you can't reel them fast and keep their action, to something a bit heavier. So Len Thompson would be my second choice.
Another spoon that I've done pretty good. I'd say not earlier in the season, but as the season progresses a little and the fish become more active, is the Johnson Silver Minnow, which is another classic old lure. And the thing is, because it has a weed guard, you can actually chuck it up into some weeds and not have to worry about snagging.
And even like fish it down into the top of the weeds a little bit. So you're actually taking the top of those weeds and not picking them up.
And there's so many good spoons. Like we all have our favorites, and everyone says their favorite is the best. But like, let's be realistic. There's so many good spoons. They're popular with a lot of different people. Pick the one that you have the most confidence in, and you're going to catch fish on it. Yeah. Pike loves spoons.
100%. And as the water gets warmer, I'll transition. I'll keep using jerk baits year round because, again, you can fish them any speed you need.
They're fantastic.
But instead of spoons, I'll often go to a spinner. If there's a cold day, then I'll go back to a spoon. But in the hot summer days, I love fishing like a big Meps or something like that.
Like an Aglia long.
Yep.
Yeah. Number 3
or 4. A big Black Fury even.
Yeah.
Something.
They like that black color. I have a Black Fury with a black marabou feathered treble that I tied, and that thing smashed fish.
Yeah,
lots of pike.
Yeah,
actually, my favorite, I like spinners, but you remember at the cottage, I love a spinner bait just because it's similar to a spinner, but you can actually retrieve it through logs and weeds and stuff like that, and actually come through. And pike love them.
Yep,
I've had more pike destroy spinner baits than anything.
100%.
But
and pike like pink.
Oh, they do. They love it. I think anything bright and visual, because pike are very visual feeders. They like that. They like white. They like chartreuse. They like pink. But
100%.
One cool thing, though, I'd have to mention, in the early spring when they're like in very shallow water, one fantastic lure, and we learned this a few years ago, is like not a jerk bait, but like a minnow bait, like a original Rapala, the original floating, because it's so shallow. Sometimes you're fishing in like literally 18, 20 inches of water, and these pike are just like in these shallow areas. Is something that floats, because then you can cast it out and just slowly reel it and let it dive down only like maybe a foot, and then if say like there's a bunch of weeds, just let it float up, pull it over those weeds, and then reel it down again. And it really helps you fish effectively the shallow water, because if you chuck a jerkbait in, a lot of them dive down 4 or 5 feet, you're instantly just going to snag weeds. So that floating minnow bait
I love the jointed Rapala. I've caught lots of pike on the classic jointed Rapala. Another thing too is something that some people might not think of as a pike bait, but swim jigs and chatterbaits.
100%.
So, like, primarily people might think of those as a bass lures. But how many times have you been bitten off by a pike while fishing for bass in those things?
Too many times.
And when I tie them on and I'm targeting pike, I smash fish. Like it's awesome.
In white, just get a white swim jig or a chatterbait, and you're good.
Yeah,
I know it's a really good pike chatterbait. Just to add, the big blade chatterbait. They have this one.
Yes.
I don't even know what color it's called. It's called something weird like coleslaw or something. I don't know. But it's got like a bright orange blade, and the big blade has a big blade on it. And then the skirt is like a mixture of white, chartreuse, and orange. And then I put a huge 6-inch Kalin's white grub on it. You reel that thing through the water, and it's just like, just vibrating. But then it's got this big white tail, like just undulating behind it. And pike love it. I've also caught bass on it, but pike love it.
Yes. So let's have a little bit of story time here.
Okay, story time.
I'll put you on the spot.
Because I have a lot of people message me, and they're like, we love the podcast, but we'd like to hear more stories.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
perfect, then.
That's good, but some of our stories are boring. So hopefully this is a good one.
Well, I'm going to ask for a good one. So what's your best spring pike experience? Now, you can't say the one I'm thinking of.
Was it the one where we almost capsized?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good story.
Or we can just tell that one really well together.
Okay. So there's always that time of year when you're like, we got to get out late March. We got to get out. And some years the winter just like this year, winter just held on and got a lot of snow and it just doesn't happen. But some
the water's
years,
not opening up.
There's a magical time when the last week of March, the water's perfect. There's no ice and you get out and there's tons of pike there.
Yeah.
And we learned that this day.
Yeah.
And this is before we had, my sports boat. We had Andrew's portage canoe.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Algonquin canoe.
Yeah.
And so we went out.
But it was the last day of March. It was the last day.
So we went out, and around the shore, we were actually pushing through ice. Like there's like, when the ice is my favorite time of the ice, when it starts to break up and it turns into like little ice shards. It looks like ice bobbers, and you're pushing through, and it's like crackling around you.
Yeah.
So we push out. We're ice breaking through in my canoe.
Yeah.
And then
it's very Canadian.
Yeah. And then we actually threw some Timbits on the ice, trying to see if it would break.
Yeah, I was like, how thick is this ice? So I dropped a Timbit. Don't ask. Very
just, like,
Canadian.
Skittered along the ice.
I was like, it is thick.
So we started fishing around the old bulrushes and stuff in the bay, and the wind was kind of picking up. It was slightly windy, but we were like, we fished in this plenty of times before. We weren't concerned, and so we were killing it on the pike. I caught 2 like nice pike that I actually kept that day.
I think we caught 7 pike in half an hour.
Yeah.
It was like cast, boom, 5 minutes later, cast, boom, and they were all decent sized pike. Like they weren't giants, but they were good fish.
Yeah.
And we were just catching. I think we were using like minnow baits and jerk baits.
I was using my X-Wrap a lot.
Yeah.
That day.
And they were really shallow.
I don't think I took my X-Wrap off because you were using swim baits and you were having success in your swim bait and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't keep them off the hook with the X-Wrap, so why not keep using it?
Unfortunately.
So we're fishing down this shoreline, and we're going into more and more sheltered area, like further from the main lake. So we didn't realize that as we go back, the wind seems like the same, but it was actually getting worse. We were just heading into more sheltered area, and all of a sudden we look and we're seeing like white caps out near the front of the bay again, where we're parked our car, where the launch is, where we have to go back, and we're like, okay, what are we gonna do? And so we turn around and we start heading back, and as soon as you get past this one point, the waves just start hitting this canoe. Like it's insane. Like we're trying to paddle at the crest of the waves. We're not like tipping over, and the wind is pushing this canoe so hard we physically cannot turn the canoe.
The wind was
towards
at least,
shore.
I'd say like 40 km. It was bad.
It got bad.
Yeah.
And it was just blowing the bow of that canoe broadways into these waves.
It was at that moment I 100% thought we were going in.
Yeah.
Like there's
this
no
water's
doubt in my
cold.
mind.
Like there's ice still in the water. It's cold. So yeah, we started pushing back, and we could not. I was hoping to kind of tack, which is, I couldn't stay headlong into the wind, so I was hoping to maybe tack a little bit, head straight into the wind for a bit, but then kind of shoot off to the side, back with the wind, to get back to our launch. Absolutely no way was that happening.
Yeah.
So we ended up risking it. We paddled broadside to the waves and shot back as best we could to some random guy's backyard.
Yeah. And he wasn't home, thankfully. So we just quickly pulled the canoe up, and we were just like shaking. It was like terrifying. And then we just like quickly, Andrew ran, up the road all the way down to the car and came back. And I was just trying to hide in this guy's backyard, and he's like, we're not weirdos. We just didn't want to get wet.
That was probably 2 things. I would classify that day as 2 things. One of the most dangerous canoeing experiences I've had in my life.
Yeah.
And 2, one of the best pike fishing days I've ever had in my life.
Because I said to Andrew, I'm like, if it hadn't got windy, we would have caught tons of fish that day. Like we were smashing them. Like it was one of those days where like the solar system was lined up and everything, the stars were aligned, and like every spot that looked good, you caught a fish at.
Yeah.
You're calling spots. Like there's a pike here 100%. You cast out a jerkbait and then you just see a wake come up. Because we're fishing shallow, and then boom, the pike would slam it.
That's one of my favorite things with pike fishing is, so again, my love and desire to actually target pike when I was younger, after I read the Scientific Angler book, and they had these pictures, and they were talking about the wake. So it's like if you see a wake behind your bait when you're retrieving it, that like an added wake it's probably a pike following your bait, chasing your bait. And I was like, I want to see that. I want to have that happen. And it never happened when I was at the cottage, but when I started fishing spring pike and I'm fishing 2 feet of water, 100%, you get a 30-inch pike that's chasing down your bait.
Oh yeah.
There is a big wake behind your bait, and
like
that is
shark.
one of the most exciting moments in your fishing life, is going to have the first time you see like a big wake 6 inches behind your wake bait that you're running, and you're just waiting for it to take, and half the time it doesn't, and it breaks your heart.
Yeah. Pike, everyone thinks pike are dumb, and generally I agree with that. But when it comes to fishing, like,
I've seen them eat sticks that fell out of a tree while I was snagged in the tree shaking the branches.
So again, like I said, they have a pretty good reputation of being dumb. Yeah. That being said, I have seen in clear pressured water in Lake Ontario, I've seen some really big smart ones. You have to think the big ones got big for a reason. They're smart. Like a quick example, I was fishing somewhere with very clear visibility, like 20 feet of visibility.
GPS coordinates.
Yeah. And I was fishing like big, like to get these big pike to even, come to your bait, you got to be using a big swim bait, like an 8-inch swim bait.
Give a big offering.
And I was chucking a big, I think it was like a 8-inch swim bait, and I was whipping it out really far, and I was slowly reeling it in, and out of nowhere, this big pike was just following it. My buddy was like, look, huge pike, and he was freaking out. And the pike was just following behind my bait like it knew it was a lure. It was just like, is this the best you got? And then as soon as it got close to shore, like I ran out of space to reel, and I even sped up because I was like, okay, maybe I can trigger this thing. And I sped up, and the fish just like, it didn't speed up. It just was going slow. And as soon as it got close to shore, it just turned and went back into the deep water.
Yeah.
Kept casting. I got him to follow in several times. I tried different lures. Like that particular fish wouldn't touch anything. And I tried glide baits. I tried swim baits. Like maybe if I had a live sucker or something, he would have took it. But there are times in clear water and pressured water where these fish, they've been caught. They know. They're not dumb.
And so that's the thing. Like pike, if you can get them on a reaction strike, that's awesome. If they're kind of on the bite and you're putting something in front of their face and it just like appears like a jerk bait, like something that's you're fishing through cover where all of a sudden it comes into their view and it's right there, you can get that reaction strike on them and it's fantastic. Like they'll hit jigs and they drop down if they're in the area. So, but at the same time, I've fished live bait under a bobber, and you'll see a pike come up and just stare at it and then just swim away, and it's live bait like this but there should be no reason why it's avoiding it, and it's not even pressured water, but sometimes they just don't want to.
That's the thing, is when fish are hungry, they'll eat lures, they'll eat baits, but sometimes fish just don't bite.
So whether or not it's smarts or not, or just weird instincts that they're using, I don't know, but
some days it just doesn't work.
So don't get disappointed. If you're seeing in the spring, you'll see a lot of pike. You might not catch a lot, so depending on what stage they are in their spawn, they might not be that interested in what you're doing. But there's a lot there.
They do get pretty beat up in the spawn. Like you'll catch a lot of pike in the spring. You'll see pictures of people holding them, and their fins are really bloody. And you're like, oh, what happened to that fish? That's what happens when they spawn. They're very violent spawners.
Yes.
So
the males will nip and bite the females. So if you end up catching a big female, you'll see her covered in nicks from all these male pike. Like,
and they fight too. Like you'll see big bite marks on them, and it's when they fight. I've seen footage of it on YouTube of pike fighting when they're spawning, and it's crazy.
It's nuts.
Not romantic at all.
So where is it open to fish pike? So we're talking about spring pike. So
right now is April. So April right now, zone 17, which a lot of our listeners live in zone 17. It's open year round. So the Kawartha Lakes,
always check for exceptions in the Google book, because they're just like sanctuary areas and whatnot.
So like Lake Ontario, which is zone 20, closed. Any bay off of Lake Ontario, closed. Like a lot of people will tell me like, oh, like there are some bays and stuff that are off Lake Ontario. I'm like, no, that doesn't count as Lake Ontario. But if you actually look in the rule book, it'll show you the actual zone borders. You can actually zoom up, and those areas are in an exception that is closed. So you can't fish for pike in a lot of the bays off Lake Ontario. You can fish for pike in the creeks going up into zone 17. That is considered zone 17. So there's a lot of area in zone 17, if you're from this area, that you can pike fish.
100%.
But in April, a lot of everything else is closed still. So you have to use caution, like Andrew said. Look at the rule book. There's lots of random exceptions.
100%. So zone in Zone 20. Like I said, it's closed in all of April, just into May, I think.
I think like the first Saturday of May or the second Saturday of May it opens, and then Zone 15 or 7 or
it's
the
the
zones
week
that
after.
are it's a week after.
Yeah.
That.
So, what would you say is necessary? Let's start with necessary gear for pike fishing. Like, what is something that if you're going to go target pike, what do you need to have besides rod and reel? Like, we'll talk about in a second what's what would be beneficial to have, but what is necessary to have to catch a pike?
You need to have just a want to have fun. Just kidding. That's a cheese answer. You need to have
the power of friendship.
You really should have jaw spreaders.
That's a good one.
That should literally, you should not have jaw spreaders. Like, you need them, especially if you're fishing hooks with treble hooks or lures with treble hooks.
The first thing I was going to say is leaders. So again, if someone's completely new into fishing, but pike have teeth, and so the difference. Actually, I want to talk about this for a bit.
Okay.
Is the Essex family. So that includes pike, chain pickerel, walleye. Chain pickerel are not pickerel like walleye. Chain pickerel, they're actually on the East Coast. They're coming up from the States and whatnot. So they're all in the Essex family. So they look pretty much the same, just different color patterns on the body. Yeah. So those species of fish have blade-like sharp teeth, whereas a walleye, it has teeth. Like, don't lip a walleye. You're in a world of hurt. But they have conical teeth, so it's like a cone that comes up in their mouth. So line will rub through their teeth, against their teeth. It's fine. It'll get a little chewed up with a walleye.
It's like a needle point.
It's like a needle point. However, a pike mouth, it's like a bunch of tiny like scalpels pointing up. So if your line goes through that mouth and like turns at all, like, cut, gone. Yeah. So if you're fishing, you can catch pike on 10, 12 pound mono or whatever you're using, or 30 pound braid, whatever you want. That's fine, but use a leader. If you're using straight line, you're going to get cut off 100%. If a pike takes that anywhere further than like the back treble of your bait, you're toast.
Yeah, I mean, you can get lucky, but if you're targeting pike, 100% use a leader. Because you don't, here's the thing, you may be like, I don't care if I lose the odd lure, but like, you don't want to leave a fish with a huge jerkbait in its mouth. Yeah. That's kind of cruel.
And like, I fish like I said, I'll use the example of an X-Wrap again. The amount of times I've hooked into pike and the X-Wrap is completely in their mouth. Like, you don't see it when their mouth is closed. Yeah. And so you get, like Jesse said, you get jaw spreaders. And what you do is with those, the pike, they just like to keep their mouth shut. You get them in the boat, like, you're not lipping them, so their mouth just stays clamped shut. So the jaw spreaders go in, it literally forces their mouth open wide. And a long pair of good needle nose, like, don't use forceps, get something like a long-handled needle nose pliers, and then you can get your treble hooks out of that mouth, and then your pike is good to go. But I have tried to unhook pike, and I've successfully done it, but I've ended up with some scrapes after 100%. Yeah. And I know even you, I remember at the cottage you were looking like, oh, I'm gonna get this picture of a pike, and you're holding his mouth open. Yeah. He like shakes his head, and his thumb just starts literally squirting blood.
I was like, for the gram. At that time, Instagram didn't even exist. For the gram.
Yeah. It's like the one tooth in the front of this pike's like bottom lip, just like
guaranteed. It's always the small ones that'll bite you.
And their tongue is covered in teeth. Yeah. Like, picture a cat tongue, but they're really hard spikes and razor sharp. Like, it's insane. So that's dangerous. That's stuff that I would say is 100% necessary. You need a leader. So of leaders, there's the common ones. You have wire leader. You can get titanium tieable leader, which is nice. And then what I now use, I used to use wire leaders or nylon coated, but I had a lot break and fail on me over time. Yeah. Just because it get bent up and stuff like that. So then it weakens the steel. I've now started making fluorocarbon leaders. Yeah. And fluorocarbon is a little bit more expensive than steel leaders. Or they are more expensive. It's 100%. But the benefit with fluorocarbon is, like we talked about in our line episode, if you have any nicks and abrasions on your line, you can see it with fluorocarbon. With braid, you can't. With steel, you can't. If it's kinked inside or if it's broken inside of that nylon coating, you may not know.
And it'll just snap.
And then it'll just snap on the next fish because now it's just nylon coating holding that lure on. Whereas a fluorocarbon, you can look and say, yeah, I see these nicks, but let's say you're using 80-pound fluorocarbon for pike, which is overkill, 100% for most pike applications. Yeah. unless you're targeting like 40 plus inches your whole time, then yeah, go higher if you want. But if you're just going for your run-of-the-mill pike, an 80-pound leader, I'd have no problem catching 4 or 5 fish on that.
Or way more.
Or more, yeah. But like at minimum. Like always check your line. But on a steel leader, I could catch 3 or 4, and then I'd be like, it's real iffy if I trust this to catch another one.
Because pike, they really flop around when you're trying to get them in. They're rolling around in the net, and you look at your leader, and if you're using just the standard cheap steel leaders, they just kink up, and then they're done. Yeah. So you really have to buy like the titanium leaders, which cost a lot of money, and at the same time, they're really nice, but fluorocarbon is, so-called invisible, right? Yeah. So you get that added benefit, but you can look at the leader and be like, okay, there's a nick there, and you can feel it, but you can see it.
So for me, that's one of the reasons, my biggest selling point for me on the fluorocarbon is I can then make my own judgment a lot better as to, do I trust this to catch another fish? Like, will I put this back in the water? Because I can see everything on it. I know exactly how that should operate now in the water. And generally speaking, you go fluorocarbon leaders, you get higher end tackle because generally you can't find cheap ones of those. But the rest of the terminal tackle, when I've bought steel leaders in bulk, I can't tell you how many times that little clip just busts open. Yeah. Or like bends out. Like,
you bend it open, put your lure, and it just breaks off.
Oh, my goodness. Or like I've pulled it out of the package and like put a lure on. I'm like, oh, cool. And it's like, and it just snaps. I'm like, what the heck? Yeah. So with the fluorocarbon, I have not had any issues with them of, a stupid failure. Yeah. I haven't had a single one.
But that's what happens when you buy leaders at Dollarama.
Hey, this is for average people. It's all you can afford.
True. But anyway, good things in the work. We do have some fluorocarbon leaders coming. But yeah, we'll talk about that another thing. But for pike, definitely some kind of leader you need to use.
100% you need a leader. So then, or for other gear then, Jesse, what would you recommend? What would be a great rod if you had to go to someone, look, they want to buy a rod that's going to suit them for kind of an all-around, but for pike primarily? What action, what kind of price range would you be recommending they look at? Yeah,
so like I always say, like, price range, buy the best gear you can afford. I'm not going to give you a price range because you might be able to spend $100 on a rod, you might be able to spend $500 on a rod. So just buy the best one you can get. For me, if I could only have one pike rod, either spinning or bait casting would be the same. I'd get a 7 foot 3-ish medium heavy. Yeah, I feel like for what you're gonna do, like unless you're fishing smaller jerk baits, which I mean, that can be good at times using slightly smaller jerk baits. Yeah. A medium heavy is great. Like, it's a rod you can fish year round for pike. You can use spinner baits on it.
No problem casting like this mid-size X-Wrap on a medium heavy. Yeah. You'd have a hard time maybe casting a husky jerk, but if you're actually going to a more modern jerkbait with a long castability and whatnot, a weight transfer, you'll have no problem casting anything like that on a medium heavy rod.
It's always better to have something slightly heavier than you need than something that's too light. So say you got like a medium jerkbait rod, now you can't chuck big swim baits on it. Yeah. So I mean, I'd say medium heavy, depends where you're fishing, but if you're fishing for big pike and you're chucking big swim baits, you may have to go up to a swim bait rod, which is like a heavy or an extra heavy. But a medium heavy, like that's the rod we always talk about. Yeah. It's the rod that does everything. And if bait casting is good, rod. But spinning is great too. Medium heavy spinning is not a heavy rod. It's just a little bit more, a little bit more of a kick to it than a medium. That's all you need. But that's all you need. And then I'd load it up with 30-pound braid.
Yep. I'd say 30-pound. Yeah. I remember like the first time I put on 30-pound braid, I was like, oh, I'm used to using 10-pound mono. That's all I ever used, ever. And then I was like, oh, I'll try braid. And it's like 30-pound braid, it's so strong. And I was like, I can rip through weeds. It's amazing. And like it's 30-pound braid is probably one of the best all-around lines. Oh, yeah. Like, unless you need a specific application like we talked about. But it's one of the best all-around lines. If you told me, here's a spinning reel, and you need to fish for anything with it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put on 30-pound braid, and then I'm going to put a leader on if I need it.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of people, they think that you have to use heavier braid, because like a lot of the bass fishing content that you see on YouTube is like people that live in the States. Okay. Yeah. So like 50-pound braid is good and all, but 30-pound braid is actually rated high. Like if you buy a braid and it's 30-pound, it'll actually say right on the spool, it'll be like max breaking strength, and it's usually closer to 40. Yeah. So you're using 40-pound braid. So I mean, it's heavy enough for pike. Like you will have no problem catching any pike in Ontario on 30-pound braid, unless you're chucking big baits. Then you should use it.
And that's why. And your line is more to, again, we talked about that on our line episode a bit, but you're going to go to a heavier gauge line if you're fishing either structure that you need to protect against, or you're fishing through like really thick weeds. And you're going to be using 60-80-pound braid, some guys for bass. Or if you are casting big baits. So musky baits, you're going to use heavier line because you don't want your $200 musky bait to go flying because your bail closed.
Yeah.
Or something stupid, your line tangles. And so that's the reason why you'd go higher. But for catching a pike, if you have 30-pound braid, you are overpowered really for that fish, for your line strength.
Yeah, because
it's just good because
the average pike isn't that big. You're not catching 40-inch pike every cast. The average pike is like 2-3 pounds at the most.
Yeah.
So you don't need super heavy equipment. This is just for the average person just going out wanting to catch a few fish. Use any gear you have, you'll catch them. Yeah. Just don't be crazy. Don't use like a little ultralight ice fishing rod.
So that's good, is like what not to use there.
Yeah.
But another thing I know people have asked is in the past was, if you're fishing spring pike, like pike season might be open in your area right now. It might be open shortly. Bass season is not. So how can you avoid catching bass?
So we touched on this a few podcasts back.
It was one of the questions asked by the listeners.
So I know a lot of people, and it's really annoying because a lot of people will use the excuse being like, they'll fish for bass and they'll be like, I'm fishing for pike. It's like, you're using a Senko.
Yeah.
Like you're not fishing for pike. I'm not saying you can't catch pike on Senkos, but like, don't fish slow plastic techniques. Like, don't be chucking, like flipping jigs or Texas rigs or Senkos around docks and like weeds and stuff like that. Like, dude, you're fishing bass.
Yeah.
Okay. There's plenty of bass that are in that area that they're cold water fish.
Bass are coming in shallow.
They're really sluggish.
They're looking for the warmest water.
Yeah.
So pike are in their ideal temperature pretty much, and bass are just trying to get the warmest temperature they can because they're not there yet. So the warmest temperature, though, is right up on shore, right in these shallow areas where the pike are. And
the problem is, like, we've done a little bit of the early season catch and release bass fishing. And generally what we've caught the bass on have been jerk baits. You were fishing, that little hair jig. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just slower techniques. Pike also love those. So, I mean, like, I don't think there's an actual way not to catch bass. But definitely I would avoid, like, specific bass techniques, obviously.
100%. So that's kind of what I was looking for with that leading question. Yeah. was exactly, if you don't fish for bass, are you going to catch some? Yes, but target your technique and your area for pike. It's like you said, don't be flipping a dock with a Senko and be like, I'm going for pike.
Yeah, because like here's the thing, we've been pike fishing in April on the Kawartha Lakes, chucking big, Len Thompson spoons, and you smack a 3-pound smallmouth.
Yep.
I have a big, fluorocarbon leader and a big spoon on and a small tits. Like, what are you going to do?
Yep.
You unhook it quickly, you release it.
I had a 6-inch swim bait, almost, I guess a swim bait, not a glide bait.
Those big bass will smash it.
And I caught a big smallmouth.
And the problem is you always catch the biggest smallmouth when they're out of season. So like a few years ago, I was fishing for pike with a big glide bait, and I caught the biggest, not my biggest smallmouth, but one of the biggest smallmouth I've ever caught on a glide bait too. And I had to throw it back, and I couldn't take a picture of it. And everyone's like, oh, you 100% took a picture. I'm like, I literally didn't, because that is one of my biggest pet peeves when people are like, oh, just take a picture and post it later. It's like, it's against the law.
Yeah.
But I don't want to sound like a goody two-shoes, but since it's one of my pet peeves, I'm just like, no. I took a picture in my mind because it was a big smallmouth, and it smashed a big glide bait. Like, that is like everyone's dream, and it happened like 3 weeks before bass season opened. I was so mad.
Because I know we got a couple 5-pounders together. We had a double header and 5-pounders, and it was the day before bass season.
It was the day before bass season.
But like I said, that's why I was so happy about last fall. Again, tangent again, but last fall with that big smallmouth I caught on the BFS combo.
Yeah,
that was my biggest in-season smallmouth I've caught.
That was a chunker.
I love it.
Just like me.
Again, open water. That was one of my last days out on the water. And that was a great time, and I want to open this year.
And he didn't invite me.
It was my dad.
Okay,
so
fair enough. John, if you're listening to this, I forgive you.
But now he has to listen to this. I'll tell him.
Okay. So anyway, we're approaching the time of the end here.
Yes. So now it's time for the AOA Q&A.
Yeah. So we're actually only going to do a few questions.
Yeah.
And they particularly have to do with our giveaway, the kite fish giveaway. So the question was about fishing crankbaits for like after trout opener. Mm-hmm. How do you catch fish on crankbaits, and is it illegal to use treble hooks in the creek?
No, so it's not illegal to use treble hooks in the creek. There are some areas in Canada where you can't use barbed hooks or you can't use treble hooks. So you have to look in the regulations for your area if you're listening somewhere on the East Coast or out in BC. But around here, I'm not aware of any creeks that have any restrictions on using treble hooks. In in the creeks.
I think that's like one of those myths that someone's like, oh, somebody told me, someone,
You can't use a treble hook that's like loaded with a bunch of like 1 ounce weight, throwing an 80-pound braid through a pool full of trout or salmon and snag them. Yeah. That's the kind of treble hook you can't use because you're clearly doing something illegal.
If you're snagging fish on like spinners or crankbaits in the creek, you're fishing completely wrong.
Yeah.
Steelhead generally aren't just like,
And generally after the steelhead run, it's a bunch of dropbacks. You're not getting generally these pools filled with like 100 steelies coming in. Yeah. You're getting
they're all
3 or 4 or 5 maybe in a pool. And so you can target, and I love to do that is I'll put on some like micro cranks. So with some I really like the Gamakatsu finesse treble hooks because they're thinner gauge, so you can fight them on a lighter action rod or a softer rod.
Yeah.
But they are still strong enough that they're not bending out, because I know some of like the micro cranks that come with like really really small like crappie hooks.
They're thin.
As in like
crappie, like bend them out.
As in the fish species cut type of hook, and the steelhead will bend it out.
Oh yeah.
So
easily.
They also make some now that like for BFS for trout fishing with it that have single like Siwash hooks on it.
Yeah.
100%. That's fantastic. So what I like to do is you get these baits, like you get a little rubble crayfish, let's say, in the creek. Or the cricket lure. I love the cricket
lure. Hopper is like my favorite.
The head and cricket, or the rebel cricket hopper. So
black.
I like the green one, but again, preference. So you can hold your rod out again, like around here in the East Tribs, you're fishing creeks that are 10, 15 feet wide or something like that. And then I'll put my rod out in front of it, and you'll get the depth, and this bait will be sitting right in front of the steelhead's face, just like wobbling right in front of it, and you just slowly back it up to his face, and then you can annoy him into attacking that thing, and you'll just kind of swing it back and forth in front of his head, and you're just holding your rod there, like moving it back and forth. And sometimes they don't, and you leave it be, and sometimes they'll absolutely smash the thing, or you reel it in fast across the pool right in front of them, and they'll fly out from the corner on an undercut bank and smoke that thing.
Yeah. Same with spinners and spoons. Like a lot of guys that fish like float fishing, they're like, oh, you shouldn't use lures in the creek. It's like at times they can be amazing.
Yeah. So use the biggest thing with that is use the current to your advantage. It's always going to sweep your stuff downstream. So if there's a big pile of logs down there, like a big log jam, open up your bail or open your spool, let it drift down, and then just close that, hold it there in front, just in front of that log jam. And you can hold it in front of the structure so you're not going to get snagged on it. And it's just working there in the current for you. You don't have to reel in.
Don't be afraid to put a few split shot in front, because those little crankbaits sometimes they won't get deep enough. So I've had good success putting a few split shot, like
I've even kind of put I've tied on with some stoppers. I've put a like a 1/4 ounce egg sinker in front as well. Like I put it 3 feet in front of the line, so that comes down, and it's just that way it stays closer to the bottom of the pool for me. So yeah, all that stuff is fantastic. Would be my little tips on fishing a crankbait in the creeks. It's fun. Do it.
Oh, it's 100% fun. And then the last question was, someone was asking me if you can use like live worms for steelhead fishing, and the answer is 100% yes. Again, most of the time if you're fishing early season steelhead, you're going to be using like egg imitations and pink worms and stuff. And one of the most popular steelhead baits ever is a pink worm, or pinky as they call them. So why wouldn't an actual worm work? Obviously it works.
And you can even get the trout worms. You can buy dew worms, or you can buy trout worms, and they're just thinner worms.
I find like I try not to use live bait unless I absolutely have to. That's just me. So like I'd rather use plastic worms, because generally they work so good that I have no need to use live bait. But I find especially after trout opener, when the fish head back to the lake, but there's still a few that are stacked up under log jams and stuff. One of my favorite ways to catch them after a rain too is a big juicy dew worm on a decent sized hook and 1 or 2 split shots, and I'll let it drift under there. And you'd be surprised the size of steelhead that'll happily gobble up a big dew worm.
Yeah.
And like you said, the little red wigglers are amazing, especially after a little bit of rain. You can float fish them, you can bounce them along the bottom. They're fantastic. And sometimes it's just that I think it's the extra like little scent, or just the ultra, they're obviously natural because they're real. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's the deal.
Yeah.
But again, try to use, artificial bait when you can, because you don't have to worry about it dying. You can just leave it in your pack, and you don't have to worry about it smelling like death from being in your car. Yeah. Everyone knows if you fish the death smell of worms, oh, it's bad. But anyway, so again, we'd like to thank Matt from Kitefish for sponsoring the giveaway for this this podcast. Again, he's giving away 5 packs of beads, 1 pack of pegs, which will deal you for all those 5 packs of beads.
Yeah.
And then 5 packs of plastics. And I'm not exactly sure what bead colors or what plastics he's giving away, but you're going to have to talk to him because he's going to be talking to you about that and then shipping it to your house. And normally we announce the winner of the actual giveaway on the podcast. But since we are a little backed up this week, what we're going to do is this is going to be an Instagram only giveaway. So definitely check us out on Instagram, and we're going to announce on our stories how you can enter and win this giveaway. So another thing I want you guys to do, because we're going to start doing giveaways where you have to be the first 10 people to enter, and that's it. So turn on post notifications on our Instagram account, because I'm going to post something and say, first 10 people that DM me this message are in the draw. And you have to be the first 10 people. So make sure you turn on the post notifications of our posts. Okay.
Nice. Awesome. So look forward to that. Check out our Instagram, like Jesse said, Average Ontario Anglers, with underscores in between each of those words. And then we have our YouTube. If you're watching us, hello. If not, feel free to check us out. We have our other content on there. And as always, thank you so much for listening to yet another, I'm sure, excruciatingly boring episode of Average Ontario Anglers.
And we would like to thank you. At the time of this recording, me and Andrew are really happy. We just passed 1,000 downloads, which is fantastic. Like, it's been going so well. Me and Andrew are really happy. We're really thankful for all the support. We get lots of messages from you guys and girls just telling us like that you like the podcast, you enjoy it, and then giving us suggestions on topics that you'd like to hear from. So if you have a subjection, or not a subjection, if you have a
suggestion,
suggestion
us to some weird questions.
If you have a suggestion for a topic, definitely let us know, because we have the whole year of episodes ahead of us, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Those weeks add up quick. So there's 52 different topics in a year that can be discussed.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, thanks again for tuning in. And we'll catch you on the next one, episode 6.
Yep.
Episode 6.